You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Have you ever stopped to think about the hands that grow your food? Not the companies, not the machines, but the farmers, often small scale, often overlooked. And they're trying to feed the world on shrinking margins and a changing climate. Now imagine if you could help reshape the future of food, not just as a consumer, but as an active participant in agricultural innovation. You're listening to One Bite is Everything, where the table is set for change. I'm your host, Dana DiPrima. Today on the show, we're diving into a powerful question. Why is agricultural research so underfunded? And how can we, as citizens and eaters, help to close the gap? To help us unpack this, we're joined by Peter Kelly, founder of Grow Further, an organization building a movement to fund agricultural research for smallholder farmers around the world, from dry season wheat in Ethiopia to iron-rich millet in Zimbabwe. In this episode, you'll learn why GMO debates barely scratch the surface of what agricultural research can do, how participatory plant breeding is giving women farmers in Ghana a voice in science, and why climate solutions might just start in the soil. We'll also explore how the seeds that grow in Africa and Asia might one day nourish not just their local communities, but even your own dinner plate. We need to consider the idea that solutions we're looking for aren't just in legislation or local markets, but in the overlooked research fields of smallholder farmers halfway across the world. We'll also explore how these global stories might shift how we think about our role, not just as consumers, but as contributors to the future of food. So if you're ready to reimagine your connection to farming and food and find out how one small bite can ripple out globally, then stay with us for this episode of One Bite is Everything.
There's been grassroots support of public health ever since the Rotary Foundation and the March of Dimes supported research to develop a polio vaccine. And developing a polio vaccine was a pretty significant contribution to society in and of itself, but it also set a precedent for what is now an entire sector of medical research charities. And there are ways that folks get involved in other kinds of science as well, everything from bird watching to, helping find distant galaxies. There's lots of public engagement in science in general, but not so much in agricultural science, which is the future of food security.
Let that sink in. While we pour billions into food aid and nutrition programs, almost no one is investing in the research that could prevent hunger in the first place. Not governments, not philanthropists, and until now, not regular people.
And there's a lot of engagement in food security more generally. Lots of folks volunteer at food banks and even donating to international food aid, but not so much on the research side. So we saw a really big gap there where there really ought to be a whole sector of organizations, and there was essentially nothing.
So I want to say that when the general public thinks about agricultural research, they're thinking about maybe the development of GMO seeds, and what else is in that category that we should really be thinking about?
Yeah, well, GMOs are a small section of agricultural research. I mean, even within the plant breeding category, most plant breeding is of a conventional nature. And that's basically because there are thousands of genes controlling a huge number of different traits that are of interest. And when you develop a GMO, you're basically just moving one gene at a time for one trait. So GMOs at this point are largely limited to mostly corn and soybeans and cotton in the United States, Canada, Brazil, and Mexico with two traits, herbicide tolerance and Bt insect tolerance. So if you compare that to all the different countries out there and all the different traits that you want in your crops and all the different crops out there, and none of this is all that relevant to food security either. I mean, the Green Revolution increased the yields of wheat and rice and really made a significant difference to food security in a way that a herbicide tolerant gene in a GMO has not.
The Green Revolution of the mid-20th century was a seismic shift in agriculture, transforming global food security in ways that modern GMO crops have yet to replicate. By introducing high-yield varieties of wheat and rice, along with improved irrigation, fertilizers, and mechanization, countries like India and Mexico went from chronic food shortages to self-sufficiency in just a few decades. Yields of wheat, for example, nearly doubled between the 1960s and the 1980s, lifting millions out of hunger. Unlike many contemporary debates about genetically modified organisms, often focused on single traits like herbicide tolerance, the Green Revolution tackled the bigger picture, feeding populations at scale and stabilizing national food systems. Its legacy is still felt today as billions continue to rely on the crop varieties and infrastructure it established, proving that systemic agricultural innovation can sometimes outpace the promise of targeted genetic tweaks.
And now gene editing is starting to make GMOs obsolete, which is a more powerful and less controversial technology. So yeah, the GMOs are just a small slice of agricultural research, which serves a broad variety of goals in terms of not only improving yields, but also improving nutrition, improving environmental sustainability, helping farmers improve their incomes, and so forth.
So talk to me a little bit more about that, about what there is beyond that sort of tip of the iceberg, the GMO. What else is going on? And explain a little bit how the public can be involved in this kind of research.
Yeah. Well, some of the big successes in agricultural research are hybrid corn, which has revolutionized yields, the short stature wheat and rice. I mean, without these technologies, it would be difficult to support the current population. But many other things as well, drought resilient crops to help farmers adapt to a changing climate, more nutritious crops, both breeding existing crops to be more nutritious and elevating indigenous bean things like that. So Grow Further is supporting many of these types of projects. We have 4 projects right now in Africa, and we are expanding into India. Many of these projects touch on multiple impact areas.
This next story is about beans, but it's also about power. Because when you ask women farmers what they need instead of telling them, you get solutions no outside expert could ever design.
We have a Bambara groundnut, which is a type of indigenous bean breeding project in Ghana. And this project started out by asking the women farmers, this is primarily grown by women, these beans, what they wanted. Because if you don't ask, then you're just kind of guessing. So it's a participatory plant breeding project that starts out with asking the farmers what they want. And it turns out that the main thing that they wanted was early maturity, because in northern Ghana, the men's plots tend to get the first dibs on the planting equipment, and the women's plots get squeezed into the growing season. So without doing the socioeconomic survey, we might not have known that. Or our partners at CSIR who are implementing this might not have known that. And then at the core, it's a breeding project to produce the first commercial seed variety of Bambara groundnut that's ever existed. And then some agronomy and some food science and other things, agricultural extension every project, we want to make sure that farmers are actually going to use it. So we make sure that it's engaging the farmers, also engaging important partners like agricultural extension and private seed companies who can help take it to scale and make sure that farmers are using it. We have a very competitive process for selecting these grants. These 4 in Africa I was referring to were out of an application pool of 700. And so we have a very competitive process when it comes to having a strategy for farmers really using this and really using this at scale. So as I was saying on the impact areas with this Ghana project, improving women's income, like other legumes, it's nutritious, it's ready for a changing climate. It puts nitrogen back into the soil. It has a lot of advantages. There are some practical difficulties. The yields are not that high. It takes a while to cook it. So it could definitely benefit from some science. And the research institute that applied for us had been trying to get funding for a project like this for 25 years. And it just fell through the cracks in all of the other donors who had sort of specific ideas of what they wanted to do. We put out a more open-ended grant announcement, and they came to the top. So that's just one example. And then we have other projects that are more cutting edge technology, like an AI-based app to identify crop diseases. We have a project in Ethiopia to study how best to irrigate wheat. Ethiopia has long been a famine-prone country, but in recent years, the government has introduced a new system for off-season, dry season wheat production with irrigation. But because irrigating wheat is such a new concept in Ethiopia, it hasn't really been studied how best to optimize it. So this project is doing just that and promises to help Ethiopia go from a famine-prone country into a wheat exporter. And then we have a project in Zimbabwe that's helping to improve the iron content of pearl millet, which is a climate resilient and relatively nutritious crop to begin with, but this project will make it even better in terms of the iron content.
Ethiopia, once synonymous with famine, is now on the brink of rewriting its agricultural story. The government has begun pioneering dry season wheat production using irrigation, an entirely new concept for a country long reliant on rain-fed crops. Early results are promising. Irrigated wheat fields have already produced enough to cut wheat imports by 60%, and Ethiopia could soon transform from aid recipient to wheat exporter. Yet, because this irrigation system is so new, researchers are racing to understand how to optimize water use and maximize yields across the country's varied landscapes. Meanwhile, across the continent in Zimbabwe, scientists are improving the iron content of pearl millet, a hardy, drought-resistant grain that's already a lifeline for millions in arid regions. Nearly 29% of Zimbabwean women of reproductive age and about 30% of young children suffer from anemia, with some rural areas reporting rates as high as 46%. By biofortifying pearl millet with higher iron levels, researchers hope to combat these deficiencies while strengthening climate-resilient food systems. Explain to me more about how the public can get involved in this kind of research. Seed savers come to mind. So of like making sure that, the seeds with the memory here are preserved so that they can support us going forward. But explain more to me about how people can be involved.
Yeah, well, we have donors and volunteers from all different ages and backgrounds, quite a few students and retirees. So depending on how much time you have and what kind of expertise you have, there are lots of different ways to get involved. So we have volunteers who read applications, and that can be a really eye-opening experience to see these grant proposals coming from countries that may not be familiar in, dealing with agricultural issues that many people might not have thought about, it can be kind of mind expanding in the same way that I think Albert Einstein, when he worked at the patent office, I'm glad he didn't spend his entire career there. But I think seeing all of those ideas really helps to expand your mind and launch your career. A lot of students have helped us out and put it on their college application, and folks have advanced their career and expanded their mind in different ways. We have a diversity of donors and volunteers, overrepresentation of folks who are part of the diaspora from developing countries like Indian Americans and Chinese Canadians and things like that. And some food security experts who have been working in bureaucratic organizations and maybe haven't been able to accomplish exactly what they know what needs to be done, but they might not have been able to accomplish it at work. And then they come to us and help us do things right in a personal capacity.
And so before, or in sort of the mainstream, agricultural research is happening at universities and in governments and private foundations, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's mostly funded by private foundations. There are a few private operating foundations that do agricultural research, but generally speaking, agricultural research in developing countries happens in government agencies and universities. And there's a little bit that happens in the private sector, but there's only some things that work in the private sector. There has to be a way to protect the intellectual property. And so something like crop rotation, where it's more of a concept, it's not easy to study that in the private sector, particularly in a developing country where protecting intellectual property can be more difficult. So in developing countries, it's mostly government and universities. In the US, the private sector does play a significant role in agricultural research, but the public sector also plays a huge role. And that public sector and university funding basically comes from government and from a handful of major foundations. There's really very little funding from individuals the way there is for other causes.
Through the research, you're addressing climate change and having crops be more resilient. I don't know that people necessarily align farming with positive impacts on climate change. And I'm just curious what you found and what your research shows.
Well, farming and agriculture can have a positive impact on climate. And I've actually worked on these issues in other capacities, in addition to at Grow Further. I was part of the development of a bill in Washington State called the Sustainable Farms and Fields Program, which encourages farmers to adopt climate-friendly practices on their farms.
Here's the big shift. Agriculture doesn't have to be a part of the problem. With the right tools and the right knowledge, it can actually be a part of the solution. That is a mindset we could all use more of.
Now, many of the projects that Grow Further funds are helping with climate as well. So the Bambara groundnuts, particularly when grown with compost, as they often are under this project, put soil carbon back into the soil and have climate as well as food security benefits.
And the work that you're doing, do you see this having an impact on the thinking around policy, like for driving agricultural change?
Yeah, so we're not in the business of lobbying foreign governments on their policies, but we do hope to inspire others to follow our lead. So I think there are a lot of practices that we use that I would like to see more widely adopted. There are many agricultural research institutes could market what they're doing better. A lot of scientists are doing great work, particularly scientists in general, but agricultural scientists even more so, are doing great work preventing famines and stuff like that, but they're not communicating about it effectively. And we help to mentor scientists in communication so that they can raise funds for other projects as well, and that other institutions can learn from our marketing and so forth. I think we're doing some good things in terms of grant-making processes. We have an open-ended grant application process, open to different kinds of ideas. A lot of funders have a very specific idea of what they want to do, and then they put out an RFP to get contracts for that. But if you're more open, like We want to help farmers adapt to a changing climate, and we're open to different approaches. Then you can run a super competitive process with science projects that have the potential to benefit millions, even on a relatively modest budget. So running an open application process as opposed to just asking around and maybe ending up with something relatively mediocre, I think is a great process in grant making. I think it's also a good process in nonprofit management. I've discussed this with other international development organization CEOs, and a lot of them are trying to get away from the sort of top-down model of operating programs through country offices and move towards this more competitive grant-making process where the ideas come from professionals in the country.
I mean, I observe a lot that, especially in the farmer space, there are, in the US anyway, not-for-profit organizations that are saying, like, we want your farm to be like this. And we know, because we've talked to people, they're not necessarily experts, other than having been in the space for some time. And they say, we'll fund you if you pivot and do this. And sometimes that's not, like you said, it's not what the farmer really needs.
I mean, I've been a small grower myself. I grew tomatoes in upstate New York, and technology changed my life. The new variety of tomatoes came along that was disease resistant and different color, and it had a high value in the market. I would not have succeeded without that as a market gardener. I was mainly in the business of growing tomatoes for restaurants. And so, yeah, I've seen the benefits for small growers of improvements in technology firsthand. I've also worked with agricultural extension services, which are sometimes helpful and sometimes not, because farming is very specific. So, when somebody comes in and tells you what to do, it may or may not be helpful, particularly for a farmer in a developing country who may be facing a lot of constraints around capital or even the rights to the land that they till.
Here's where the For Farmers movement steps in, right here in the United States. The For Farmers movement is doing exactly what Peter describes. The movement offers grants to small and mid-sized farmers, not with strings attached, not with a playbook they're forced to follow. Instead, we listen. We ask farmers what they need most to succeed, and we resist the urge to chase trends, because real innovation starts when farmers lead.
And Grow Further, we're focused on supporting innovations where the ideas come from local researchers, as opposed to telling farmers what to do.
Is there a reason you're focused internationally on the African continent? Are there other places?
Well, yeah, we're looking to expand into other places. We actually have an India grant cycle going right now. We got several hundred applications for that, and we've narrowed that down to, and not applications, expressions of interest. And we've narrowed that down to a smaller number that we are currently waiting for full proposals from. So we expect to have some India grants going within the next few months. And we've actually already made an award in India in collaboration with the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation.
MS Swaminathan, often hailed as the father of the Green Revolution in India, was the visionary scientist who helped pull millions out of hunger. In the 1960s, when India was on the brink of famine and dependent on food imports, Swaminathan's collaboration with Norman Borlaug brought high-yield wheat and rice varieties to Indian soil, sparking an agricultural transformation that made the country self-sufficient in grain production. His work didn't just change farming, it changed the fate of a nation. Swaminathan believed that true progress must be both scientific and humane, later calling for an evergreen revolution that would sustain productivity without harming the environment. Over his lifetime, he received countless honors, including the inaugural World Food Prize in 1987, and posthumously, India's highest civilian award, the Bharat Ratna, in 2024. As former Vice President Naidu once remarked while presenting him with a national award, Swaminathan's contributions fed a nation and inspired the world, a legacy that continues to shape global food security today.
This is getting a high level attention in India, even though we're still at an early stage in our programs there. And we'd like to expand into other countries as well. In terms of our country strategy, we are guided by where we can have impact and where we can get things done and engage the diasporas and things like that. So India is great on several levels. There are a lot of places that have a large population of smallholder farmers. India also has great scientific research capacity. It has a diaspora that understands the importance of science, understands the importance of civic society and food security, and has the income to give. So those are some of the reasons that we're interested in India. Within Africa, we're focused on countries that have relatively good scientific research capacity and a relatively good business environment, which is actually different from many international development organizations. If you follow government grants, they will basically take you to places that are of geopolitical importance. And those places of geopolitical importance are in some cases very difficult to do business, and it's easy for money to just disappear and so on.
You mean like in a corrupt sense?
Yeah, so a place like Afghanistan, for instance, it's geopolitically important, but it's also very corrupt. And we're not doing business in places like that.
What could the United States learn from what your experience has been both on the African continent as well as in India?
Well, some of the research that we're supporting is also relevant to small-scale farmers in the U.S. There are some similarities in what small-scale farmers everywhere face. To some extent, agriculture is site-specific, but to some extent, smallholder farmers are facing the same challenges.
What's happening in India or Zimbabwe might feel distant, but if you're a farmer in the United States, you're likely facing the same headwinds: climate change, soil depletion, access to good seed, and limited resources. The answers being developed abroad might just come back around to help the farms here survive and thrive.
I think agricultural research funders in the US could learn from our open grant making process, as well as potentially transferring some of the technologies to the US. We often think of agricultural technologies as being transferred from the US to other countries, and that doesn't always work, obviously. But it often happens the other way around as well. In fact, the American agricultural system is basically completely dependent on the crop side, on crops that are native to other places. So there are a few crops that are native to the United States, but nothing of great importance. So sunflower seeds, cranberries, blueberries, basically your trail mix. But anything else, including corn, which is from Mexico, is from elsewhere. So in the long term, the United States is completely dependent on foreign genetic material for crop production.
The only crops truly native to North America, like blueberries, cranberries, and sunflowers, represent a tiny fraction of what fills American farms and grocery aisles. This dependence on foreign genetic material underscores how agriculture has always been an act of exchange and adaptation across cultures and continents. In fact, more than 90% of the genetic diversity in crops used to sustain U.S. agriculture today comes from outside its borders. It's a reminder that food security and innovation don't happen in isolation. They're the result of centuries of global collaboration, migration, and shared knowledge.
And there's obviously no royalties associated with any of that. On the animal agriculture side, there are some animals. You could eat salmon and bison and turkeys and have something resembling a normal diet in that respect. But on the crop side, there's just nothing that originated in the US.
Very interesting to add that to the immigration conversation that's swirling around here.
Yeah.
Our seeds have all immigrated here. What would we do without them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, agricultural research has a long history of ties to immigration. The Rockefeller Foundation program that launched the Green Revolution, it started as the Mexican Agricultural Program, which was designed to help farmers in Mexico improve their livelihoods as an alternative to illegally immigrating to the US. So agricultural research has lots of different benefits. I mean, from things like environment and women's empowerment and nutrition to things like preventing refugee crises and improving national security. So there's lots of different benefits of this kind of research, lots of different ways to frame it from a marketing perspective, and lots of different kinds of people who are interested in supporting it. As I said, you have donors with different political viewpoints as well as different professional backgrounds and stages of life.
Can you talk a little bit about the food security and preventing these refugee crises a little bit in terms of agriculture? Because I'm not sure that people look at those issues through an agricultural lens.
Well, food security crises are related to conflict. But in the long term, a lot of these crises are also related to agriculture. And without improvements of agriculture, we would be in a much worse situation than we are. I mean, there's no way to feed the current population with the agricultural technology of 150 years ago. That just wouldn't work. So this is something that has gone back hundreds or even thousands of years, that when harvests fail, people move elsewhere and they're not always welcome in the places that they move to. These are long-standing issues. If we can improve agriculture, adapt it to different parts of the world so that every country can be self-sufficient in food production, that would make everyone better off.
I hear people talking about, this big headline of that we can't feed the world and the growing population. I'm just curious about, from a technological standpoint and with this agricultural research, if you think that there is an opportunity for us to move forward in a way that is sustainable and regenerative.
Well, yeah, I think agricultural research, a lot of it is specifically oriented towards environmental aims. There's research on how to reduce methane emissions from rice paddies, for example. Some research is like specifically targeted towards environmental outcomes. Even research that's not specifically targeted towards environmental outcomes, improving yields with basically anything that does more with less. If you can be smart about how you grow things so that with the same amount of fertilizer, the same amount of water, the same amount of land, you can grow more, well, that puts less pressure on land, it puts less pressure on natural resources, and so on. And most technologies that are relevant to productivity are not particularly related to the scale of the operation. So it's possible, and this has been done in China for thousands of years, to have highly productive agriculture on small farms. Now, larger farms are in some cases more productive from a labor perspective, but they are not necessarily any more productive from a yield perspective. So it's very possible, and you can see this in Europe and Japan and so on relative to the US. They have smaller farms, but they're very productive from a yield point of view. So we can definitely maintain small farms, even increase the number of small farms. I'm happy to see that many folks have gone into farming in the last few decades and that we actually have more small farms than we did 30 years ago. So, yeah, that's definitely consistent with growing nutritious, high-value food, and none of that needs to be done in a large operation.
When you said earlier that you have a modest budget, what does it take to move the needle from Grow Further's perspective?
Yeah, so individual projects are usually in a low six-digit range. And we've found that that is roughly the optimal project size in terms of getting the highest return on investment. There are obviously larger projects out there, but what we look for is a sweet spot where we can have the biggest impact per dollar. And to do that, we look for projects that are at a proof of concept stage, which is that budget range is good for proof of concept stage projects. It actually goes further in a developing country in most cases. So it might be like $1 million on a purchasing power parity basis for that proof of concept. And then we look for projects that have good local buy-in from, say, a seed company or a government agricultural extension service that's ready to take it to scale once that proof of concept is established. So the total cost of getting it to scale, including like building the seed production facility and all that, is going to be more than the cost of the project. But we have a very competitive process for selecting projects, and we look for projects that have not only a path to scale, but also a path to scale that we don't have to pay for. So we can leverage other institutions to get these ideas on thousands or perhaps even millions of farms.
So once you do these projects, how are you getting the word out? I know that you said earlier that, across seas there are lessons to be learned. How does your communication happen, for example, there in Ghana or in Zimbabwe, and how does that spread to other farmers where the same practices might be relevant?
Well, it varies from one project to another. Typically, these projects engage government agricultural extension services. In some cases, the government agricultural extension system is relatively weak. And in those cases, they sometimes work with good microfinance institutions or other organizations with a retail presence that can reach farmers, or getting technologies into private dealers. So just improving seeds, and then farmers buy their improved seeds from the same dealer that they've always used. Or there's peer-to-peer knowledge sharing that's becoming faster than ever with advances in digital communication technology. So more and more farmers have cell phones, and if they don't, then maybe their agricultural cooperative does, and they can share ideas with each other quickly. So it's no longer necessary to like go from one village to another doing one workshop after another and telling farmers what to do. You can develop some good ideas, and then if there's a good idea, word will spread fast if it actually is a good idea.
If there's like one sort of bottleneck in the agricultural innovation space, what would you think it is?
I would say that funding is the primary bottleneck in agricultural innovation, particularly funding for projects that are relevant to smallholder farmers in developing countries. The developing countries are usually not investing a very high fraction of agricultural output in research and development compared to the US or compared to their economies more generally. So there's a lot of potential to invest more. As I said, agricultural researchers marketing their work is a big issue. Individual donors having ways to engage is another huge bottleneck that we're working to overcome at Grow Further. We'd like to see a whole sector in the long term the way there is in medical research, not just us. There's too much here for one organization to do alone. But yeah, those are some of the bottlenecks. And then obviously a changing climate is a huge challenge.
All the more
So,
reason we need extended research on agriculture.
yeah, without innovation, yields will go down with a changing climate. And in some cases, nutrition will even go down. And not so much from climate, but from increased CO2 levels. Many crops, if you grow them under higher CO2 levels, you get more carbohydrates and less of everything else. So basically, the world needs innovation just to keep up with these unfortunate trends in terms of climate change and increasing carbon dioxide. And as I said, farming can also help be part of the solution there, putting carbon back into the soil and reducing the use of chemical inputs that have a carbon footprint and so on.
Where is the best and most sort of prolific agricultural research coming from now?
Yeah, well, the best stuff actually comes from a lot of different places. And that's why we have an open application process as opposed to just saying, oh, well, these guys are the most prestigious. Let's just ask them for the proposal. Because a lot of times the best ideas come from less obvious places. In recent years, China has played an increasing role in agricultural research. Their agricultural research budgets have gone up enormously in recent years. And we don't have any programs in China at the moment, but we would like to build programs in China in the future to leverage some of that research capacity, which could be useful to farmers around the world as well as in China.
What's happening at Grow Further that I may have missed, if anything?
Well, we've got all sorts of things going right now. As I said, we gave out this award in India just a few days ago. So that's like launching our programs in the world's most populous countries. Just a few weeks ago, we launched some new programs for kids to get involved. We have kids raising money for us at farmers markets. There's a package of information and tablecloth and things like that we can provide. So those are some of the new things just within the last few weeks. We have an upgraded website that I think maybe live later today. So yeah, lots of things on the horizon in the next few months, particularly expanding into India, where there's a huge population and a huge potential for impact there. And then longer term, inspiring other organizations to create a whole sector of agricultural research charities and really expand and diversify the system for financing agricultural research so that it's not just dependent on the US government, which, as we've seen, can be unstable. And the Gates Foundation has a sunset date on it, which I think is actually a good practice. But what's going to happen after they close down? Who's going to fund agricultural research then? So to really diversify the base of support is, I think, critical for society in the long term.
Besides writing a big check, if you had one opportunity for listeners to take an action today that would help move the needle for agricultural innovation and for small farmers, what would that be?
Well, you can go to our website and sign up for our newsletter to find out about different ways to get involved. There are a variety of ways to volunteer, both on the program side and on the fundraising side. So, encouraging your friends to get involved is a great way to help out because we're really looking to build a movement here.
What we heard today is that agricultural innovation isn't just about science. It's about listening. It's about asking women farmers in Ghana what they actually need, supporting climate-smart crops in Ethiopia, and funding research that isn't dictated by profit, but by purpose. And maybe most importantly, it's about realizing that what happens on small farms around the world can deeply inform how we grow, eat, and live right here in the United States. Because if we care about food security, if we care about sustainability, and if we care about justice, then we can't afford to ignore the research that feeds us all. Huge thanks to our guest, Peter Kelly, for showing us how investing in smallholder farmers is an investment in all of us. One Bite is Everything is co-produced by Sonia Dillon and brought to life each episode by our sound engineer and music master, Russell Chappa. If this conversation intrigued you or made you think differently about your next meal, join our OB Insider list. I'll provide a link in the show notes. You'll get more behind-the-scenes insights and some deeper connections. And if you want to help us bring on even more powerful guests and interesting conversations, I urge you to leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you're listening to this episode. It's one small click that makes a really big difference. Thanks for listening to One Bite is Everything. I'm your host, Dana DiPrima, and until next week, eat like it matters, because it does.